let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we are doing something really cool. We're taking a classic economic theory and turning it into a dynamic visual tutorial. We're getting into the very core of consumer behavior. Like, how do we actually make choices when our resources are limited? Now, I know that sounds a little abstract at first, but by the end of this, you're going to see exactly how these invisible, split-second decisions take on a very real, physical, geometric shape. So start by asking yourself this: how on earth do economists map human satisfaction on a flat piece of paper, right? Because happiness, utility, satisfaction, those are completely subjective feelings. You can't just throw happiness on a scale like a bag of flour. Yet every single day, you and I are making these trade-offs to maximize our personal happiness, and we're doing it without even realizing we're running complex math in our heads. Well, to capture that subjective feeling and make it visible, economists rely on a pretty brilliant conceptual tool.
Which brings us to section 1, the indifference curve defined.
Okay, here is the formal definition of that tool. An indifference curve, which, by the way, you might also hear called an iso-utility curve, is a curve showing various combinations of two commodities that yield the exact equal level of satisfaction to the consumer. Now, the absolute key word here is equal. Seriously, no matter where you are sitting on this curve, your net satisfaction remains 100% identical. You don't prefer one combo over another, you are perfectly indifferent between them because, well, they make you equally happy. To translate this textbook definition into the real world, we're going to look at just two specific commodities to keep things simple: food and clothing. Just imagine you have a certain amount of both, and we want to figure out exactly how you might trade one for the other, all while keeping your overall lifestyle satisfaction exactly the same.
Let's move on to section 2, the trade-off schedule.
To shift from pure theory into hard data, we have a concrete schedule of a consumer's choices right here. We've got 4 combinations: A, B, C, and D. In combination A, the consumer has 1 unit of food and 10 units of clothing. But as we move down to combination B, food goes up to 2 units while clothing drops down to 7. Move to C, and we're looking at 3 units of food and 5 of clothing. Finally, in combination D, it levels out at 4 units of food and 4 units of clothing. Are you noticing the pattern here? As the units of food steadily increase step by step, the units of clothing absolutely have to decrease to keep the consumer's satisfaction perfectly balanced. But I really want you to consider the rate of that sacrifice. This right here is what economists call the marginal rate of substitution. So in step 1, to go from combination A to B and snag that 1 extra unit of food, the consumer willingly sacrifices 3 units of clothing. That's a 1-to-3 ratio. Then in step 2, to get another single unit of food, they only sacrifice 2 units of clothing, so a 1-to-2 ratio. And by step 3, to get that 4th unit of food, they only give up 1 unit of clothing, which is a 1-to-1 ratio. Basically, the consumer is sacrificing clothing in a continuously diminishing ratio. Why? Well, it totally makes sense. As clothing becomes more scarce in their closet, it becomes way more valuable to them, so they're willing to give up less of it.
All right, section 3, graph construction. Let's actually map this out.
First, we need to set up our geometry. We'll put the units of clothing on the vertical y-axis and the units of food on the horizontal x-axis. This gives us our physical space to plot out those subjective choices we were just talking about. When we plot those exact combinations, boom, we see the indifference curve in action. You can see point A way up high with 10 units of clothing and just 1 of food. Now follow the curve down through points B, C, and D. You can literally see those sacrifices we just talked about mapped out in physical space. See that steep drop from A to B? That is your 1-to-3 sacrifice. Then the slope starts to flatten out a bit as we move to C, showing the 1-to-2 sacrifice. And it flattens even more heading to D for that 1-to-1 sacrifice. By connecting these dots, we trace this really smooth, downward sloping curve that bows inward right toward the origin. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the magic of the indifference curve, because despite sliding all the way down this curve and radically changing the mix of goods in their basket from mostly clothing to a totally even split, the consumer's net satisfaction hasn't changed one bit. Point A brings them just as much happiness as point D. Which brings us to section 4, the big takeaway. So the absolutely crucial point is this: an indifference curve is always a downward sloping line, and it perfectly represents the willing trade-offs a consumer makes between two goods. Its unique curved shape, being convex to the origin, is entirely driven by that diminishing ratio of sacrifice, the marginal rate of substitution. And above all, no matter where you decide to stop along that line, every single point equals the exact same level of total satisfaction. It's essentially a perfect map of neutral choice. We are making these kinds of invisible calculations every single day, right? Whether we're choosing between spending our budget on eating out versus buying new clothes, or just balancing our free time between different hobbies. So I'm going to leave you with this to think about. If your daily choices and your favorite trade-offs were plotted right now, what would your personal indifference curve look like? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. And hey, keep looking for the geometry in your everyday choices.